Welcome to the front line of truth. In today's report, we uncover the hidden war waged by neo-colonial powers against the Sahel Confederation, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. While Western interests shift and intensify, our states fight not just for sovereignty, but for survival. This is more than politics, it's a battle for Africa's future. Stay with us. Welcome to Talk of Africa 360, your source for insightful news, analysis, and thoughtful commentary. If you value informed perspectives and fact-based reporting, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an update. Disclaimer: the content on this channel is based on reliable public sources and credible online information. It is intended strictly for educational and analytical purposes. We do not promote or endorse political violence, hate speech, or any form of discrimination. Our goal is to inform, not to inflame. Thanks for being here. Let's stay informed together.
Telesals Le Grand Entretien welcomes tonight the Army General Abdurrahman Tani, President of the Republic and Head of State. In this interview with the President, as is customary, we will address the security situation, which has been of great concern to the population in recent weeks, as well as some current affairs. Mr. President, good evening and thank you once again for granting us some of your time to talk about the insecurity prevailing in certain parts of the country. It is no secret that for several years now, our Sahelian region has faced enormous security challenges, mainly linked to terrorism. The challenges are significant, but it must be acknowledged that progress has been made, even though much remains to be done. In truth, the difficulty of the task is also explained by the complexity of the security issue, in which some foreign powers outside our region continue to play a destabilizing role in the hope of regaining lost privileges. Mr. President, in general terms, what is the current state of the security situation in Niger and more broadly in the AES Confederation? Is the situation under control despite the difficulties? What are the overall prospects? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you. Abda, it is a pleasure to share with all our fellow citizens of the Confederation and the world who are following us regarding this security issue in our region. As you said, it is a problem tied to geopolitical and geostrategic interests. But allow me first to pay tribute to all the peoples of the Confederation, especially the valiant people of Niger, and to offer my condolences for the civilian and military deaths. I also want to salute all our defense and security forces who, at the cost of great sacrifices, fight day and night to keep our confederal space and especially our country, Niger, standing. To answer your question, we must start with a historical reminder. As the Quran says, reminder benefits the believers. We need to remind our people, Nigerians and others, about the definition of this threat we face and the interests behind it, which are nothing other than the defense of the geopolitical and geostrategic agendas of imperialist, particularly neo-colonial, powers. Events must always be placed in the context of globalization. I mean placing events in their globalized context by recalling that in 1979 many have forgotten, and many others never knew, there was a hostage-taking in Saudi Arabia. In the Grand Mosque of Mecca, pilgrims were taken hostage, an event associated with or attributed to so-called fundamentalists, young students, perhaps PhD candidates, in Islamic studies. In response to this hostage crisis, several countries mobilized. Among them, France was the first to offer to assist Saudi Arabia by deploying what is still called the GIG and France's National Gendarmerie Intervention Group. But the Saudis knew it was the arsonist wanting to pose as a firefighter. They politely but diplomatically rejected the offer. Instead, the operation was carried out by Pakistani special forces based on the logic that, as Muslims, they could enter the mosque where hundreds of pilgrims were being held hostage. This occurred in November 1979, and the crisis ended a month later, in December 1979, but that was just the beginning of a grand conspiracy I cannot recount in full here. In 1980, the conflict was moved by neo-colonial and imperialist powers to Afghanistan. You know what happened there from 1980 until around 1986, you know the implications. After Afghanistan, the conflict was moved further to Iraq. We know what happened in Iraq. We know the actors, we know the implications. We know the geostrategic and geopolitical interests and all the hidden agendas behind that period, during which many Iraqi citizens lost their lives. Neocolonialism didn't stop there. When one hotspot dies down, another is already set to ignite. The conflict then returned to Syria, but before Syria, they tried to ignite it closer to us in Algeria, with the return of the Mujahideen from Afghanistan. So Syria became another target of these geostrategic and geopolitical interests of imperialist neocolonial powers. You've seen what happened in Syria up to its most recent developments, where the whole world finally discovered the true game of these neocolonialist powers. Before Syria's end, they had already placed another hotspot on standby and reignited it, Libya, right on our northern border. We know what happened in Libya, we know who was behind it. And we know the consequences of that intervention, against which, sadly, our African countries did not have the courage to raise their voices. The means are there so that you can succeed together with the countries of the Confederation, starting with Niger. Express your needs, whether financial, material, or human resources, and your wishes will be granted. That is what they told them in March of this year, 2025. On March 15th to be exact, a meeting was held. Present were the French delegation, the American delegation, a delegation representing the United Kingdom, and several European and African countries, particularly from West Africa. This shows that these neocolonial imperialist powers have no limits to the resources they are willing to deploy to destabilize us. And that if we are still resisting, if we are standing firm despite the obvious financial and economic difficulties of our three states, it is thanks to the undeniable efforts of the Sahel Alliance states through their defense and security forces. These efforts have allowed us to control the situation, contain it, and even reverse the trend, despite everything these neocolonial powers have invested. That's why I say to the people of the Confederation and to all Africans, you should be proud. Despite all the media noise and the announcements of impending doom that we see spread across the Confederation's territories, I repeat, our people should be proud of what we have achieved, because we must understand that this is a systematic encirclement operation of the Confederation, planned and executed through what I call the traores of another era, auxiliaries and proxy states of France, Europe, and the West in general. So yes, this is a difficult situation, but one that we control. It's a situation with deep geostrategic and geopolitical ramifications driven by neocolonial interests. Our people must be proud of their defense and security forces. Mr. President, we also note that the security situation in Western Niger is more difficult compared to the Eastern Zone, especially around Lake Chad or the Boko Haram area. How do you explain this situation? All these current events reflect the geostrategic and geopolitical interests of imperialist neocolonial powers, who are using auxiliaries that we no longer refer to as jihadists or terrorists. They are neocolonial proxies through whom these powers wage war against our states. Yes, we are at war, and the countries I mentioned, which failed to withstand this war, are a clear example for any skeptic. This is a neocolonial war guided by neocolonial interests. Lake Chad was, for a long time, the center of interest for these neocolonial powers. But this didn't begin in 2015. Lake Chad goes back further. I personally served there in 1996 and 1997. It's true, the groups were different, and the problems were resolved differently back then because there was no neocolonial interference. Through negotiation, we reached agreements, which we commemorate every April 24th, what we call the Day of Concord in Niger. To return to the current situation, Lake Chad became, from 2010 to the beginning of 2025, a strategic target for neocolonial powers. But with the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, and later the Confederation, these geopolitical interests shifted. The new center of interest became the confederal space at the convergence of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. I say convergence to illustrate the point. This is now the new hub of imperialist interests. That is why, since the creation of the Sahel States Alliance and the Confederation, we have seen an intensification of attacks on our states. With their interests shifting from Lake Chad to the Sahel Alliance, the Western powers have also moved their proxies, their neocolonial auxiliaries, to wage war against us in our confederal space. They were determined to make at least one of our states fall. That's what explains the active involvement of certain American interest groups alongside France, which has never hidden its hostility. France remains relentless in trying to protect what it considers its interests in states it does not recognize as sovereign. Some statements make clear the perspective through which France and certain members of the French elite who lead or advise the French government still view us. They refer to us as French colonies that must not be lost at any cost. That speaks volumes, and it's a lesson for ECOWAS countries that believe they are independent, while France still considers them colonies. In the 21st century, colonies it must hold onto to ensure the prosperity of its sons and grandsons. According to their own words, if these colonies were to break free, migration would reverse direction. It would be the French crossing into these former colonies to survive. That is how serious they take the need to keep us under control. So what's happening in the confederal space is the result of deep, calculated strategies aimed at defending the geopolitical and geostrategic interests of colonial powers that are willing to trample over African lives in the Confederation, even though our people have never declared war on them. Let it be known to the Western powers, if their war is intended to preserve their wealth and ensure their descendants do not suffer, then the war we are fighting with determination is a matter of life or death for our states. Our battle is not the same, and God willing, our outcome will not be the same either. We are fighting for survival. We are fighting for the survival of the African man, period. And I am certain God willing victory will be ours. That is why everything happening in this space is an exaggeration. It's all based on amplified events, often tragic, but largely fabricated by France. And we have the proof, we have material and physical evidence. We have testimonies from people who actively participated. The battlefield has shifted from Lake Chad to what we now call the confederal space. It is a shift of geostrategic interests. It is a matter of protecting neocolonial interests and preventing the alliance of Sahel states from inspiring a broader movement in Africa. That is their greatest fear, that if the AS succeeds, other countries that until now lacked the courage to take a stand will follow its example. And the West knows how to unite to prevent that from happening. But the truth about Western greed must be understood. The West does not care about the communities that make up our confederal space. The West seeks only to protect its interests at our expense.
As reactions continue to pour in from across the continent, one thing is clear. Africa is demanding respect, sovereignty, and accountability. Was this just a diplomatic misstep or a deeper sign of shifting global alliances? We'll be watching closely. If you found this story important, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real, unfiltered African news. This is Talk of Africa 360, telling the stories that matter.